Hi, part 4 of Develop and Challenge Your Strategy. And this piece is really specifically getting into the challenge piece, although it's also important in developing. And each of these things that we talked about so far in part 1 to 3, you want to revisit and challenge and make sure that they're still true and they're still what you want your business to be. This piece now is what ought to be true. So once you've worked out who you're going to be, what type of business you're going to be, where you're going to play, how you're going to win, then you need to determine what ought to be true in order to achieve that. So, for example, if we were going to win by having the best customer service, what ought to be true within that? So we need to be able to provide X amount of customer service that's better than our competitors. What does that look like? Right? So that's where you say what ought to be true. So perhaps you are looking to be a low-cost provider. What ought to be true? Well, you ought to have the lowest prices. So how do you make sure that that happens? So there's obviously, literally hundreds of things that you could think of that ought to be true, but let's sort of focus on the key big ones. So again, associating it back to our business, what ought to be true for us is one, we ought to be able to provide as good a service and the right amount of value to customers as our top tier consulting firms, because that's one of our major competitors. So that's one thing that ought to be true. We also, in our model, we have business owners and business leaders doing some of the work themselves and being involved in that design of the solution as we go through the process to grow their businesses. So what ought to be true is that those business owners and leaders actually want to be involved in that process and want to learn about that process. So that's another thing that ought to be true. When we think about the competitor group around the accounting firms, I think another key piece that ought to be true is that business owners and leaders must understand or must recognize that their accountant who's doing their tax may not have enough of the skills and the knowledge to actually grow their business and change the operations of their business so that they can have a sustainable growing business, and it's not just focused on tax and compliance. So that's another piece that ought to be true. So for you, think about the things that ought to be true in your business, write them down, and then the next piece that we go through is we identify those things that are not true. We'll do that in the final part, and then from there we can take an action plan. So almost done. Stick with us. One more part to go. As always, I'll pop the guide or the link to the guide to help you grow your business in the comments below. Thanks.